Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time it is, wherever you are. My name is Aneesh de Vos and I've started rather giggly. The reason that I started rather giggly, not unusually for me, is because David today is less of the ponderful and more of the ignorant. And his words, everybody, not mine. Okay, and that reason being is that we have an amazing guest who I know, terribly excited to introduce, and her name is Chloe Savage, and she is a qualified osteopath specialising in paediatric osteopathy. And this is why we started quite giggly, because David is wondering what part he can play in this, and it's been suggested that he could play the baby. So he said, not me. So, Chloe, first question, because there's a lot of discussion around this. What on earth is an osteopath? What do you do? What is osteopathy?
So, I mean, every osteopath you'll see is different, but the general kind of definition is that we study anatomy, and we use anatomy in our as like a form of healthcare, and we feel, we touch, and we look at people's joints and muscles and tendons and ligaments and fascia, and we basically make diagnoses based off what we feel, and then we effectively treat that. And it's a form of healthcare that is a manual therapy as such.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. David?
Does it make sense to you?
Well, yeah, I have visited an osteopath in the past, but it turned into something much more serious, as in an operation. But yeah, it was helpful, and I'm not entirely ignorant. I have paid attention to your wonderful and informative facts blogs.
Yeah, I'm glad.
And that sort of really clued me up, and especially the clinics that you do for new mums. Yeah.
Chloe, I am particularly passionate about the well-being through pregnancy for, a new mum, a new parent. Tell us a little bit about then this paediatric osteopathy, because I'm going to have an assumption somewhere along the line that somebody's going to come to you either with a baby in situ or a baby out.
Yeah, of course. So we do, so I treat both pregnant mums and babies. And if we do pregnant mums first, we tend to look with pregnant mums, sometimes they have pelvic girdle pain, sometimes they have low back pain or upper back pain. It's quite common to experience pain in pregnancy, but the important thing to note is not necessarily a normal part of your pregnancy. And it just kind of tells us that something's not sitting quite right, and you might have had a previous injury before you were pregnant, and that's just highlighting itself, because pregnancy kind of puts your body under a whole other load of pressure that you didn't kind of experience before. So we kind of just make sure that everything is as loose as it can be, as balanced as it can be, and to get mum ready for birth. Post-birth, so we kind of see babies. It's hard for what we can actually say that we do. So we can't say certain things because of advertising standards. So I'm going to try and keep it as clear as possible, but with on what we can say. So sometimes babies can come in and they have some tension in their neck. Sometimes if it's one-sided, that can cause what we call a plagiocephaly. So if they have tension on the left side of their neck, that sometimes causes them then to prefer to turn their head to the left, and they have a bit of a flat head on the back. So we can see babies for that, and to help release tension in the neck and therefore get them to turning both sides. We see babies for kind of windy problems, or if they've got any kind of stomach issues, and sometimes there's some little things that we can find that we can, but we don't say that we do. We basically assess whoever comes into our clinics, assess them, have a feel of their body, and then just treat what we find on examination. And that can or cannot have an impact on symptoms.
Okay, okay.
So I think that's all within advertising standards.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. And would you say that part of your work as well is to, is there a level of actually supporting parents? Because it's a whole new world, isn't it, when you hold that new little bean in your hands, like, which way up do they go? I mean, that can be quite frightening in some ways, can't it?
Yeah, we do. I mean, when you come and see us, our first appointment is an hour long. So we have an hour to kind of get to know each other and to get to know a baby and kind of hear your history. And then every appointment after that is 30 to 45 minutes long. So we have the time to kind of dedicate to you, and to kind of answer any, most parents come in with like random questions like, oh, this happened, is that normal? And you can say, yes, it's normal, it's fine, or no, we should get checked out. So, and especially during COVID, with kind of health visitors or midwife visitors on the low because of restrictions and things, most people are kind of coming in and haven't had certain kind of support they would have done pre-COVID. So I definitely find that we're kind of there as a support system, and happily so. And especially with breastfeeding. So I do a lot with kind of infant feeding, and post tongue tie divisions. We do a lot of kind of releases of muscles around the face and the jaw to kind of assist with tongue tie divisions, and that then coincides with kind of more successful breastfeeding. So and that's the whole new world of breastfeeding of a newborn baby, and what we think is normal for a breastfed baby, and actually what actually is normal for a breastfed baby. So there's I'm happy to support that, absolutely.
Okay, and what about, because there are also lots of parents that would bottle feed their children. Is that something, does the body present in a different way?
Yeah. Not that I've noticed, actually. Not that I've noticed. No. That's a good question.
Well, that's my job. David, over to you, David. Do you want to chip on in? I'm putting you on the spot, as I generally do.
Yeah. I just, one thing has occurred to me is that in this in this time of dad supposedly having more involvement of late, do you see parents often turn up as a couple, or do men get more involved these days?
Yeah, I mean, before COVID, we would always try and invite both parents or partners, to the appointment. And I try and do that still now, post-COVID, for the first appointment, and just make adjustments to kind of, ventilation and things. So I think it's really important for both parents, or even, as a new mum or dad, to bring someone along with you, so that they can answer the questions that you might not think of, and just to kind of get both parents on board. I think, and then it just has to go down to one parent, whether that's the mum or the dad. But it is predominantly mums that come in, but we do get a lot of dads, actually. I have to say, dads definitely coming in, taking interest, or even nans or grandmas, or I don't think I've had a granddad yet come in, but there's definitely, I think it's good to have someone there to ask questions that you can't think of, or just for support. Yeah.
I took my daughter to an osteopath when she was a tiny baby, and the first two appointments I went on my own, and then the third appointment her dad came, and he was like, oh God, what's Aneesh doing now? But in actual fact, he was like, that is amazing, because the change when my daughter, I mean, she was a 6-week-old baby, when she'd had this treatment, just this calmness and just this sleep on that newborn baby appeared. And so he actually kind of got really turned round to it.
Oh, that's good. I had one mum, I always remember, she said she'd spoken to her partner about bringing her child in for an appointment, and he was like, that's ridiculous, like that's never going to work. So she didn't tell him that she was bringing the baby in to see me. And then the day, I examined and treated, and I can't remember what the diagnosis was, if I'm honest, but the next day he was like, wow, this is a completely different baby. And she's like, oh, by the way, I took her to see the osteopath yesterday, and then he was sold. But it is quite funny how that interaction works. Yeah.
David, I butted in. What were you going to say, my love?
Oh, no, I was apologising for myself, really, in that I was coming from a male perspective entirely, as a mother-father relationship. And of course, all relationships aren't defined by that. So
No.
Hands up to that.
No, it's a good question.
Yeah.
So it's a good point. Thank you, David. So, Chloe, what is your advice for people who are perhaps sat at home thinking, yeah, but, should I really go to an osteopath? And I'm not just talking about new mums, new dads, new parents. I'm talking about, just us sat at home.
Yeah.
What's your advice if we sat there ruminating about it in our head, thinking about that ache that you've perhaps been to the doctor about a few times? What would you say to those people?
I would say contact one and ask the question. We're all contactable. If you go onto the General Osteopathic Council website, you can search for a list of osteopaths, and you can find one in your area and just contact them and ask questions or send them an email. And most osteopaths will kind of chat to you. I know Joelle and I here at Body Flow Osteopathy, we do a free 15-minute meet and chat. So if you want to come in, ask any questions, we can kind of talk you through and kind of suggest what we could do, or if we can't help, where we can kind of refer you off to. But I would just ask the question and ask. I've actually found a lot during COVID and post-COVID. Well, I guess we are still during COVID, I suppose, at the time. But patients then ask me, have you found more neck pain, who've coming with neck pain or low back pain from working from home? And I haven't actually. But it's more kind of people sitting at home, I think, and thinking about their both physical and mental health and thinking, I really should get that sorted. There's lots of people coming in with problems that they've had for years and years, and they're thinking, I need to get this sorted now. So that's been a really interesting change that I wouldn't have thought would come out of COVID. So that's interesting.
So people are just becoming that little bit more self-aware of themselves as well. Do you think that's because, obviously this pandemic has been about people's health, physical health, or do you think that's because people have had their life adjusted in a different way, so they're not in that rush to work? For sure, they've got other things going on at home. What do you think it is?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture. I think example is, someone that normally goes into an office and has their work desk set up, they're now trying to work from home, and they kind of realise that maybe that's not, the best. Sitting at a kitchen table isn't necessarily the best idea. So kind of looking into ways they can change that. Or I think the pandemic has made us kind of, realise what our physical health is to us, maybe the more important things in life, and what we can control and what we have. So I think that's kind of made everyone start to think about their physical health and mental health much more.
I suppose I would like to ask, you're a mum, you've got a little one.
Yeah.
And, how important do you think it is to, of course, if you can afford to, but there are charities, aren't there, that support osteopathy, Children's Osteopathic Centre, isn't there, in London? So how important do you think it is? I just remember reading, it's Stuart Korth, isn't it, that said something to the effect of, at every birth there should be an osteopath, to support, the birthing parent, the birthing mother, the newborn baby. What's your feeling about it? Is it a luxury or is it a necessity? Or
in an ideal world, I would have every mum, have osteopaths on postnatal wards, have lactation consultants on postnatal wards, and have all the support. I think if you get a really good start and get the support that you need at the start, it can change, a great deal about how you have your baby and kind of what you do with your baby. I unfortunately, for whatever reason, I get into political reasons, but it is, I guess seen as a luxury. But actually most parents that I see that come in say, look, I'd rather spend money on this, than a bunch of brand new clothes for a baby, because actually will help them. This is kind So a lot of people will come and not see it as a luxury. Some people do see it as a necessity and see it as part of their postnatal care or prenatal care.
Yeah, absolutely. David, you were nodding then.
Yeah. I guess there's lots of things that need to be in place. I have experience of being present at the birth of my son, and I'm still getting over that, I think, although it was 17 years ago.
It's a bit of a thing.
And I'm aware that a lot goes on, but your place, what you do, seems entirely necessary in that environment. I mean, considering I hadn't thought in depth about what actually does go on, but I just remember a hive of activity, and it's there was not so much about, even through the pregnancy, there was not so much about where's this pain come from, can I do anything about it. Aches and pains, as you said, are quite natural in carrying a baby and giving birth to a baby, but I just hadn't considered how much help is actually available.
I did my dissertation actually when I was doing my undergraduate degree on pregnancy and low back pain.
Stop you a minute, Chloe,
because what kind of therapy?
You do have a degree to do this, don't you? You are educated to degree level. I just want to, sorry to be rude, but I just want to be really clear on this with people. This isn't something you go on a weekend course, me and my rants about them, but you do not go on a weekend course. You take a degree in this. Carry on.
So my degree was, I did my degree at Swansea University. It was 4 years full time. And then to be a paediatric osteopath, or I could just call myself paediatric osteopath, I did 2 years postgraduate course and have a diploma in it, which was 2 years, and you get 90 days with volunteering in a clinic in London, as well as exams and essays. So it's not an easy thing. The undergraduate degree wasn't easy, but the postgraduate course probably even harder, to be honest. But yes, no, we are fully qualified and we have a regulatory body. But yeah, so during my degree, I had to write a dissertation, and I did it on low back pain and pregnancy, and what methods were the best or the most effective to reduce that low back pain. I looked at exercise prescription and osteopathy, and basically I did literature search, and I found that didn't really matter what therapy you had. It was just if you gave a woman or a birthing person time, and you listened to their concerns, and you listened and you accepted that they had pain, that they were experiencing pain, and didn't just say, oh, that's common, you're pregnant, that was the most benefit to a person. So it was just accepting that it's not just part of the course, you're pregnant, okay, get on with it. Just accepting, I understand that you're in pain and it makes sense that you're in pain, what can we do about it, was the best response. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting, and that connection arises again, doesn't it? The psychological and the physical. If you want to separate them, I don't think that's ever the case in my experience. But yeah, it's you bring up the thought that if you accept it, if there's someone there that's with you that acknowledges the discomfort, etc. Then it goes on to alleviating. Yeah, sure.
Definitely. So, Chloe, there's also a lot written about birth trauma. We are trauma geeks at the end of the day.
Yeah.
How would that, if somebody came in to you and described a fairly, I won't describe mine, but it was a fairly traumatic birth. How do you work alongside that person who has experienced that? Invariably, that will go down. I remember Stuart Korth actually worked on my daughter one day and did some work on her umbilical cord because I had bled in pregnancy. And I think that was the first one when her dad was there. He was like, wow. And her whole little body went, ooh, like that. And I just remember him saying to me, get tearful about it, you must have had a really tough time in there.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, yeah, I did actually.
Oh, I didn't know your daughter had treatment from Stuart Korth. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah, I know.
You're very lucky.
She's a lucky bean.
Yeah, there's some osteopaths that I know, a lot of osteopaths that kind of say to their patients, don't tell me anything, and I will just kind of, so I don't have any kind of outside influences.
Yeah.
And then I think Stuart is one of them, to be honest. I don't think, I think he applies that technique. But I think actually for some mums especially, sometimes seeing an osteopath postnatally is the first time they can actually talk about their birth and talk about what happened. So I would say to, just tell about your pregnancy, tell about your birth, like what happened. And sometimes some women you get that just say it was this, and this, and that's it. And some women just kind of completely open up. And it's amazing. And also I find amazing the difference between the mum's story to the birthing partner's story. So you tend to get quite a few partners that come in and they're like, no, that didn't happen, or this, yeah, that did happen. It's quite interesting how your stories can differ and what you experience would differ with birth. But I think most women say it's quite cathartic to run through that process, because sometimes you just haven't had the chance to, I guess, talk about it to someone that will just listen. Yeah.
I certainly, within my own therapeutic process, I'm always asking people, what do you know about, the pregnancy that you were in? What do you know about the pregnancy? What have your parents told you about how you were carried in utero? What do you know about your birth? And equally, I also refer out to osteopaths. I mean, when I did used to live back in Norfolk, I would refer through to either yourself or Yvonne Aliff. So I do believe in that, because that trauma, that implicit trauma, back of this idea that you've got no memories from until you're 2, you perhaps have no explicit or very few explicit memories until you're 2, but you implicitly have that imprint in you. And if that birth was traumatic, those cortisol levels will rise in any case, stop and start the birth, as we know. But it really does have an impact. And certainly Dr. Sarah Buckley, can't think of her book, and I recommend it a lot to people, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. She says that but fundamentally she's saying how we birth our children actually, and there are studies that show that it can affect their emotional well-being and or distress as they grow up. And if that's why I love osteopathy, because it can release so much, and it's not just a physical thing, is it? It is that implicit cell memory that's locked in those little cells of those souls of those tiny little beings.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't necessarily kind of advertise that we treat emotions or anything like that, but certainly you can hold emotions physically. Absolutely, we all know that there is no difference. You hold your emotions physically, and I work a lot with fascia, which you can kind of hold your emotions in fascia, and you kind of hold yourself too tight. And I've had many patients that will have absolutely no idea what I'm treating them, and I'm explaining what I'm doing. But they just kind of break down in tears, or there's like an emotional release because things are just kind of gradually opening up and releasing, and it can be emotional as well as physical. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I'm a bit of a lover of osteopathy. David, are you now a lover of osteopathy?
Well, I guess I have been for a long time, since my injury, but it's fascinating to hear it in connection with the whole giving birth, etc., and before and afterwards. And it's got a tick from me. I remember that story. Yeah. Of course, it's probably a bit past my time now, but you know, in that respect. But yeah, I am encouraged for future generations that if they could grasp it and use it. Yeah, sure. You know, Aneesh, I remember the story of a mutual friend of ours who, to cut a very long story short, she actually teaches yoga.
Yes.
And she was the calmest person in the delivery room until, no, she still was, at a point in time where they actually called for the consultant gynecologist. And when he came in, there was pandemonium, absolute pandemonium, everybody trying to do their best. And she wondered what that was all about, because her being a yoga teacher, she created her own condition of calm, if you like, and everybody else was calm until that point.
Yeah.
But Annie entered the room. Curiosity got the better, and it was more than curiosity, I think, got the better. And she wrote to the gynecologist and said, well, his response was, well, they're all like that, aren't they? Well, her question was, well, no, they're not until you get there, then it goes crazy. So I suppose they're all watching their backs, watching that everything's done right, and everyone's running about, I guess, trying to prove that they're doing a good job. So I think it was an interesting story, and I related that to, I guess, my experience to being there, because it was quite calm, I believe, until a point where someone else was called in, and obviously someone of some authority and some power.
It's funny, isn't it? Carry on.
Oh yeah. I remember when I had my daughter, so she's nearly 2 now, which is a little bit scary. But when I had my daughter, my husband always recalls that I was just kind of in my own little world, and we did hypnobirthing with Aneesh, which was immensely helpful, on many different levels. But I was just kind of in my own world, and he was like, you were just kind of in your own world, doing your own thing, right or wrongly, ignoring what you've been told to do, and just kind of doing it, and just to kind of shut everybody else out. And I had a really good birth, and I remember afterwards, they couldn't stop me from bleeding, and I remember I was just kind of in my own little world. Maybe it was all the oxytocin that I had, but I remember just kind of being there and just feeding to my daughter Sophia, and I was just chatting to the midwife, and they, you know, the emergency buttons were going off, people were rushing in. I think James was having a minute, you know, panic attack in the corner of the room, not knowing what was happening, and I have and I'm just there, just like, you know, in your own little world of
yeah,
which I think we're paying for oxytocin. But it is interesting to see his story is completely different to my story.
It's incredible, isn't it, how you can experience that, and that golden hour that clearly you had positioned yourself in with Sophia. It can, yeah. And you're right, you know, I say this so many times, we are little hormonal boxes. Whatever you think of these thoughts that whiz around in that prefrontal cortex, we are little hormonal boxes, and we can affect our responses with how those hormones are released. So I'm really glad that you were able to stay in that, because, you know, if we look at James's view, that actually is quite a tough thing to happen, isn't it? Yeah. Mm. So it does. Yeah, it does. I was the opposite. I had a registrar who was not calm, and then the big guy came in and told him off in the corner. And I won't use the language, David, but my favourite wording, which like made me go, oh. And he came in and was really like, you just look at me. So I think, do you know what I mean? And there's 3 different birth stories. So, you know, it can't be that it's always like this, because I would say it's always different. Do you think, Chloe, that people ought to come in, even if nothing is particularly, you know, it's been a fairly uneventful birth?
Yeah. You know, if you have, you know, if you wanted to, I see most of those mums that come in just for an MOT because they've read that it's good for their baby, for
Yeah.
both them and baby, or mums that I've seen prenatally will come in and just as a matter of course book in. Just because someone has a traumatic birth doesn't mean that they're going to have lots of tension in their baby or them. I always had that preconception when I was doing my training: if you had a traumatic birth, therefore there should be some tension that I should find. And actually the biggest lesson that I learned was not necessarily, you know, and some women that have the easiest birth, you know, sometimes their babies do have tension too. So there's no kind of predefined pattern. You always have to feel the baby and examine the baby and just see what we find. And sometimes that's why I think where some osteopaths use the theory that don't tell me anything at all and I will work it out for myself, sometimes that is a good route to go down to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, do you know what I think? I'm a little bit more enlightened. David, are you back to your ponderful self? Have you got rid of your ignorance?
I think I'm slightly less ignorant, yeah, and I'm really appreciative. Thank you.
Okay. And I think that we want to say thank you to Chloe.
Yes, thank you very much, Chloe. It's very much appreciated.
And David, can you talk us out today?
You just do this to me, don't you? But I want to say, yeah, thanks again, Chloe. It's been very interesting, and it just changed my view on, well, I'd never considered that branch of osteopathy. And so I thank you for your input. And thank you, Aneesh, for inviting me. I feel very much like I've sort of was riding shotgun, but as time went along, I was more engrossed in the whole thing. Especially, you know, this psychological, physical connection that we all have.
Totally.
So thank you.
Totally. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and Chloe, thank you so much. I shall see you soon, hopefully. Thank you.